Yeah, plenty of information still coming in, and as you can see behind me, those search and rescue operations are still ongoing. This is a live shot picture of exactly what is happening at Ronald Reagan Airport. But those rescuers working in incredibly difficult conditions. It's now 12:30, the middle of the night here in Washington, D.C. It's pitch black. And of course, those divers and rescue workers who are working out on the river, where the plane and the helicopter are partially submerged, are also dealing with freezing temperatures. The temperature has been dropping rapidly over the last hour or so. The wind chill, the feels-like factor, now just below 0 degrees Celsius, making it very difficult for anyone who ends up in the water for any amount of time to be able to survive. And therefore, the real fear is this is not anymore a search and rescue operation, but moving very quickly towards becoming a search and recovery operation. Fatalities having been confirmed and authorities saying that they will be giving an update on the latest situation, which is likely to involve more details on possible casualties and, of course, fatalities.
Right, Nick, in terms of the prompt action that's been taken, of course, President Trump there saying that, he's of course thanking the first responders who are on the job, at the same time praying for the survival. But it does seem, because it has been over 2.5 hours since, in fact, 3.5 hours now since that collision that took place. So just describe for our viewers the kind of freezing temperatures, prevailing in Washington, D.C. at this time, particularly the waters. How cold is it to be inside the water at this point in time?
Well, when the crash took place, it was about 4 degrees Celsius, I believe, here in Washington, D.C., but the feels-like factor was already around 0 degrees. We're very much now in that territory, around or below freezing, making it very difficult for those rescuers. But of course, the people who've been in the water for 3.5 hours. After about 15 to 20 minutes, people are, according to doctors, at risk of hypothermia. Add minutes onto that to about an hour and a half, and suddenly survivability becomes very fraught in those freezing temperatures. We have just very recently had an update from the American Airlines CEO. He put out a video message. This is Robert Impson. He said that he would like to express his deep sorrow for the events that had unfolded. He said that he was coming to Washington, D.C. and said, in his words, it was a difficult day for all of the team at American Airlines. And he said their efforts are now focused entirely on the needs of the passengers, the crew members, the partners, the first responders, and importantly here, the families and the loved ones. But of course, attention is turning to those families and loved ones who had been waiting for news of their loved ones who were on board that plane, many of them waiting at the airport to welcome them. And of course, the situation after that collision unfolding very differently, not a joyful reunion at the airport, but suddenly a very different situation for them as they await news about their loved ones.
Right, Nick, if you could really describe for us the airport, and its location, which we believe is not too far from the White House.
That's right, yes. It's actually located in Virginia, but just outside of the area of Washington, D.C., the District of Columbia. It is therefore incredibly close, about a half a mile, not just from the White House, but also from the Pentagon. The Capitol Hill is not far from there as well. The State Department also. It is one of the most tightly controlled airspaces in the world, not just the United States, but in the entire world. It has about 800 takeoffs and landings taking place each day. And many pilots reportedly say that this is one of the most challenging landings to make, because not only is this a tightly controlled airspace near to those important buildings and VIPs, they have to navigate a narrow corridor as they bank around buildings that are very close to the Pentagon, taking a hard right as they come into land and try and square off their approach with buildings, populations on the right-hand side, and the river, the Potomac River, on the left-hand side. A difficult banking maneuver, and hearing from aviation experts over the last couple of hours, they say that makes it very, very challenging. And because they are making that right turn as they come into land, their focus is solely on the instruments in front of them, the information that they're getting from the ground crew, the control tower, and often, therefore, it's not a case that they're looking out of the window at what might be taking place around them. And I think, obviously, it'll have to be a case of finding out in this investigation how this accident unfolded. But the fact that there was this military helicopter in the air at the time was not something that the pilots were expecting, and probably not something that they actually saw as they were making that difficult approach, navigating that canyon around the buildings and coming into land as they tried to at Ronald Reagan Airport.
Right, Nick, when we talk about, if you could really get us a sense of how dense is the airspace when we're talking about this particular area that's been involved in this mid-air collision. Was this chopper flying blind? And basically that really means is that the chopper was perhaps not transmitting its location data.
Well, that much is not clear at this stage. What we do know is that it was on a training flight. Training flights often take place in the evening hours, late at night, something that apparently it's easier to schedule at that time of day because air traffic is often reduced compared to the busy daylight hours. So it's not unusual that they were taking that flight. But what will certainly be looked into, the fact that this was a training flight and therefore was there user error on the part of the pilots who perhaps were still being trained, still getting up to speed with the controls, still getting used to controlling that Black Hawk helicopter. That is something that they will need to look into. But on any given day, the airport is trying to deal with about 800 landings and takeoffs. It's a very tightly controlled airspace, but also a very busy airspace. Our offices are very close to the airport. We see planes coming into land and taking off. Often during the day, it's every 90 seconds to every 2 minutes. And therefore, that shows that this busy area of the United States, an incredibly busy area when it comes to air travel, was at this time of night perhaps slightly lighter than daylight hours, but still creating a very difficult and challenging situation for the pilots, both of the plane and of the helicopter.
Right, Nick, in terms of the American Airlines, have they really said anything as to what really went down? Any official word from the airlines?
Well, there was that video message that I detailed just a moment ago from the CEO of American Airlines. I'll just read part of it again. Robert Issam putting out that video message expressing his deep sorrow about the event, saying that he had a go team that was heading to Washington, D.C., saying that American Airlines would be working with local, state and federal authorities on this emergency response, but also to get to the bottom of it. American Airlines also putting out a toll-free number for people to call to try and find out more information in case their loved ones were on board. Also, in this statement, the American Airlines CEO saying that the airline's cooperation is now without pause and they want to learn everything they can about today's events, but he does warn that that will take time. We know that the National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB, they've already got an investigation underway. The FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, is also working on this, as well as numerous agencies all looking into what took place, what unfolded, and how this accident could have come to pass.
Right. From what we're hearing is officials are preparing for this to be one of the deadliest disasters to take place in Washington, something that we've seen, haven't really seen for years as far as Washington, D.C. is concerned. But bringing to mind that collision that took place, a crash that took place back in 1982.
That's right, 1982, a fatal air crash. More than 70 people were killed in that, 74 dying in that air crash when the plane went into freezing waters again on a very cold night in Washington, D.C. But there have been other plane crashes in other recent years that have brought what has happened tonight into stark relief. The most recent was back in 2009. So about 16 years ago, a crash in Buffalo, New York. 50 people died in that crash. Another one more recently in San Francisco in 2013, where 3 people died. off the back of those, there were investigations, there were recommendations, and there were changes as a result of what unfolded, the fact that there were fatalities. We are likely to see coming out of whatever investigations now take place over the coming hours, days, weeks, recommendations, suggestions as they try to get to the bottom of what happened, but as they also try and make sure that this type of incident simply doesn't happen again, not just at Ronald Reagan Airport, but other airports across the country.
Right. Thank you so much, Nick Harper.